Welcome back to my channel, guys. I know that some of you don't really like when I cover TV shows or films that are otherwise not really related to my content, meaning gay stories, gay themes, and so on. And I always hesitate when I watch something that is riveting to me and I'm like, oh, I would love to make a video about this, but I also don't want to alienate my audience that otherwise might not be interested in that topic. However, a few months back, I made a video about the Menendez brothers Netflix, not the Netflix show, but the documentary. Because again, fascinating case. And I did that video more just for my own cathartic purposes of like wanting to express my thoughts. And that one actually got quite a bit of engagement. And it led to a wave of engagement that I've been receiving the last few months. So I figured, you know what? If I want to talk about it, I should just talk about it. And somebody hopefully will enjoy or share something that I hadn't thought of in the comments that, you know, gets a dialogue going. I basically these days use my YouTube channel the way I think normal people use Reddit, just to sound off and see if anybody else has the same notes. I do have some close friends who I can compare notes with, but the fun thing about social media is you can have that conversation with like 100 people or 50 people at once, right? So the curious case of Natalia Grace. Interestingly, I made a video about this a few years ago that I think like 4 people watched. So this is kind of part 2, I guess, to that video. I did not realize that they kept this show going. I thought it was just that one season, and then I vaguely remember that there was going to be a spin-off of Natalia's perspective. Turns out there was a whole season that I missed this past year, and then now at the time of this video, the 3rd season has just been released. So for those of you who are like, whoa, what is this about? Give me context, because it's one of those things, if you know, you know, but if you don't know, you're like, curious case of Natalia Grace. What's with the rhyme? Who is this Natalia Grace person? Listen, there's a lot of true crime channels on YouTube, obviously. I'm not an expert. I'm not a true crime, I'm not a brilliant storyteller of true crime. I feel like there's much better channels on YouTube that cover this. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel here and go through all the details, but I will give you the Cliff Notes version. And I just want to share my biggest takeaway about all this that I think is more like philosophical. The Cliff Notes version. Here's the Cliff Notes version of the curious case of Natalia Grace. This is a true story. This family in the Midwest adopted this girl from Ukraine. But she's not just any adopted child. She has dwarfism, so she's a little person, and she also has disabilities that are common or not so uncommon for little people. So like deformities and developmental challenges that require many surgeries. But that's not where it stops. That's not where the challenges stop with this family adopting Natalia. Soon enough, this family, the Barnetts, feel that this girl is not who they thought she was, and this wasn't what they bargained for. Basically, they start to think that she's lying about everything and she's secretly an adult that looks like a child, and that she's manipulative and that she's violent. So this whole narrative develops of like they don't feel safe in their own house, which by the way apparently is very similar to the plot of this movie called Orphan, which I've never seen. I don't need to see horror movies like that. There's enough horror in the real world as showcased by this story of Natalia Grace. But apparently this story that the Barnetts shared is very similar to the movie's plot, right? So already it's like red flag, red flag, red flag. For the 4 people who had watched my video a year or 2 ago on that 1st season of the docuseries that was going through this story, you might remember that I felt the whole time like, nah, this family's crazy. There are so many red flags in their behavior, particularly the father and husband, Michael. Everything about him is so performative and bizarrely, it feels like he's overacting in all his interviews. It's just bizarre. There's a creepiness, there's something that feels unstable. And the story is just so absurd, right? So sure enough, turns out that she was a little girl and this family just wanted to get rid of her. Turns out that ironically, the violent monster in the house is the mother and probably the father as well. So that's the Clip Notes version, okay? This young girl though, the sad part is this is not where the story ends. As demonstrated in season 3, which just came out, like many kids who are adopted and who are in the foster care system, she's been bounced around families. And she then goes to this other family that saves her from that crazy Barnett family. But turns out this family is not so kosher either. So the 3rd season is basically detailing her journey of now trying to leave this other family. So that's the Clip Notes version. Again, there's many true crime channels on YouTube who go into all the nitty-gritty details, so I don't want to be redundant here. There's nothing like new that I can add, but for me, my takeaway, which I think is, for me was the most interesting part of all this, is yes, of course, this whole story and the case highlights how broken these systems are of foster care and clearly the vetting process of families with adoption. There's also this grimy element of financial gain that oftentimes these families will exploit the adoption system, especially if these kids are disabled. There's money coming in from the government to help with that. And so some of these families take advantage of that financially. They will adopt a ton of kids so that this is how they make an income, which is like gnarly that they can even get away with that, but that shows you how broken these systems are, right? But for me, my biggest takeaway from all this was this element of survival instincts and reading people and assessing people, because I noticed the theme, which is that all these characters for me were shady from the beginning. They just seemed shady. I'm like, why? And the interesting part is that then I always have to check myself and think, am I being judgmental? And then you realize you were right all along to have that judgment, which I guess is really intuition. So I'm always wary of families that seem to have a hobby of adopting. The last family that she has all this conflict with, they have like almost 10 kids all adopted. And to me, from the outside, as somebody who, by the way, is not very familiar with adoption, I don't know anybody, I don't think I know anybody who's adopted close to me, but I've always thought adoption is a very logical, rational thing when you're talking about a couple who really wants to have a child, but they cannot conceive. That for me is such a rational reason why you would adopt. Or let's say they would like to grow their family. They have biological children, but they feel like there's room for one more and they have the financial means to do it. But beyond that, for me, adoption stories always get weird when there's like a tribe of adopted kids. Because after a certain point, let's say somebody like Madonna, it starts to feel performative. And Madonna, you could at least say, well, she has so much money that these kids are going to be taken care of financially and so on. But the family in the documentary, both families, the first one, they have 3 boys biologically, and then they suddenly adopt this girl, Natalia. And you just have to wonder, like, why? Like, you have a sizable family. Why is there suddenly a desire for adoption? But that's not even as weird as the other family that has, again, like almost 10 kids adopted. I'm like, how is there no probing there of why do they just keep adopting and adopting? I don't believe that you just love kids so much. And I also don't know how responsible that is for 2 parents who aren't making a crazy living. They're not living off of like trust fund money in $1 million home. They keep using the word trailer in the documentary, like that they live in a trailer. That by definition means a smaller home. How do you have 10 plus people living in a small home? It doesn't make sense to me. But even just body language, facial cues, all these people to me in the documentary just seemed from the beginning weird. I mentioned the father who claimed that she was a monster, he's always like theatrical in his interviews and has these like crazy manic eyes that feel to me like they could be drug induced. Then you have this other family again with the army of children at home. The father and husband just has this like vacancy in his eyes, like there's nothing there. And then his wife seems warmer and kinder and compassionate, but this woman to me looks unusual. And I don't just mean frumpy, but there's something about her that feels nefarious, I guess. In retrospect, I think these are all instincts that most of us, I think, have built in to sense danger or threats. And so what was fascinating to me is watching this docuseries, realizing that this girl, Natalia Grace, who kept getting shuffled through families, the chaos that she experienced growing up and the trauma, I think kept her from really understanding who to trust and when you can trust somebody. And you see this sort of like Stockholm syndrome that she has, where she realizes something's off, but then she sort of sweeps it under the rug and just wants to pretend everything is fine, which is a very classic thing people do for people who grow up with abuse and like who normalize abuse, right? Because that's all they know. But in the show, they reveal neighbors and witnesses and teachers and just people around, people in the system, in the administrative, like in the court system, and doctors who all failed this girl. And so it makes me wonder, do all these people just lack that instinct of, these seem like shady characters? The final family, and this is kind of where the show ends, the final family that she stays with, they are also little people. So there's that connection, but that's the only family out of all these families where you see a light in their eyes, especially in their daughter. There's sort of like an innocence and a lightheartedness, a levity that you don't see in the other families beforehand. And I think that speaks volumes. That's exactly what I'm talking about, this instinct of like safe havens versus shady, nefarious characters. So my takeaway was essentially how often in life we should trust our instincts with people, but I think many of us, and this is a journey I'm going through, you know, beyond this case, just in life, I feel like I often talk myself out of my instincts. I'm often talked out of my instincts by others around me. With this show, right, watching it, my second thought would always be, oh, you're being really judgy, like you don't know these people, blah, blah, blah. But I now realize it's instinct. It's this basic built-in survival instinct that you either have or you don't have. And I think most of us have it. We have this sense of, this is somebody you can trust, this is somebody you can't trust. And it's not always obvious, it's not always something you can describe, it's a feeling. And the best simplistic term to use is most of the people they show who play a role in Natalia Grace's life, they have a creepiness to them. The sad part is a lot of people see that in Natalia herself, but then my response to that would be, she learned from the best, right? If you've been around creepy people your whole life and you've been raised by creepy people, you're likely to exhibit some behaviors that are creepy. The difference with her is there's also this thing about her that always feels very relaxed to me and calm, which for me feels like a safer energy to witness or to observe. This is already a long video. If you've seen this show or you've been following the story in the news, let me know your thoughts. I'm so curious.